speak Spanish, their identities as Spanish speakers are more salient in that environment compared to if they go into a clinic where all the staff are bilingual, that their identity as Spanish speakers doesn't have the same meaning. So here I'd like to think about structural inequities in terms of two different aspects. One being social status, and this has to do with all different forms of oppression, such as ableism, trans homophobia, and their intersections, racism, and how these create these differences in experiences for people, and oftentimes violence within different systems. And then we can think about place-based inequities, and these are related to where people live, the environmental justices that people confront where they live, and the different spaces within institutions that can differentially marginalize people. And within this, there are these underlying logics around white supremacy, settler colonialism, capitalism, and dehumanization, where all of these different inequities negatively impact everyone, but they disproportionately harm Black, Indigenous, trans, non-binary folks, and their intersections. Next slide, please. And so relatedly, I'd like to clarify within the DEI discourse, the distinction between equity and equality. As DEI is becoming more of a buzzword, these distinctions get lost. So here I have this image from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation about the difference between equity and equality. And we have on the top, equality is everyone receiving the exact same bike. And we can think about another example of this with our government sending one box of COVID tests to every household. It doesn't matter if one person lives there or 6 people live there. Everyone gets the same number of COVID tests. Whereas equity is supporting people to create and have access to the resources that they need to fully participate in living their best life possible. And part of this work is reducing barriers. And one of the reasons why I like this image in particular to talk about equity versus equality is because it shows that everyone is doing some work. Each person, according to their identities and the resources and things that they have available to them, is doing some work to strive towards the best life possible. So equity is passive, not a passive activity. It's an active activity that everyone is participating in. And this is where we need to start our conversations when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion within biology education or more broadly. Next slide, please. So why does it matter in biology education specifically? For the past 5 or so years, I've been working with an initiative called I Can Persist STEM Initiative for Girls and Women of Color. And it's a multi-generational initiative to foster belonging for primarily high school girls, undergraduate students, graduate students, and professionals within STEM fields. And one of the things that we know within biology is that women, compared to other fields, are well represented in biology. But we know that women of color in particular have different experiences, specifically with regard to gendered racism. So they might not be marginalized in the sense of gender, but experience a unique experience with racism that's gendered in a way that's different than men, non-binary, and trans folks experience racism. So there are some opportunities for us to disrupt things like racialized and gender notions of competence. There are some studies, recent studies that I have at the bottom of the slide that show the various ways that women of color experience marginalization within STEM, but there are opportunities using equity skills to disrupt this and create identity, safety, belonging, and thriving. Next slide. Another potential area for equity within biology education has to do with trans homophobia. Some scholars have done some research around the materials within biology education settings, particularly around textbooks and how people, their bodies, and sexuality are represented in biology textbooks. So we have some opportunities within biology to disrupt biological essentialism and cis heteronormativity particularly right now as we're experiencing significant backlash and inequitable and unjust legislation across the country. So again, we have opportunities to create identity safety, belonging, and thriving for folks so that trans and queer students have the opportunities to live up to their best potential. Next slide. So here we come to equity literacy. Now, I'm sure that for many of you, this is not your first diversity-related workshop, and we often have in the past talked quite a bit around cultural competence, cultural literacy, cultural humility, all of these culturally based words. And it's really important to think about the role of culture. But what Gorski challenges us to do is think about equity. There's some research that shows that people who rate themselves really high in cultural competence are also more likely to stereotype people. So what we want is more cultural humility and thinking about equity first, which is why we think about this equity literacy framework. And so just by way of definition, equity literacy is really about threatening the existence of inequities wherever we are. And Gorski has conceptualized this into 5 different skills. And you'll see that they're all verbs. Kimberly will go over this in more depth later, but I'm going to briefly touch on it here. So the first skill is being able to recognize. This is knowing what the inequities are and being able to recognize, notice, or see when they're unfolding. The second skill is being able to respond to inequities. When we see a microaggression unfold, how do we know how to respond to it? And both of these skills are really within the interpersonal or individual sort of levels of action, whereas the next 3 skills are more about collective action. The third one is redressing, and this is directly targeting the sources of inequities. So if we know that certain groups of students have fewer entry points for biology, or they're experiencing particular kinds of marginalization, we would target the structures that create those inequities. And then the fourth skill is the ability to cultivate equitable practices. And then finally, the 5th skill, which I think is the hardest, is the ability to sustain equity efforts despite different challenges, disagreements, or issues that might arise as we're doing this work. One of the things that Kimberly and I talked about quite a bit is coming to this work as co-learners, as ongoing learners, recognizing that learning any of these skills requires continuous learning and ongoing improvement. So we don't want to sort of project the idea that we have all of these figured out, but that the idea is that these are sets of skills that we could all be working on and all developing to improve biology education. Next slide. So another way to think about equity skills is with this idea of circle of control and field of action. This concept actually comes from some leadership development work, and I actually find it really helpful to think about how can people effectively enact equity. So in the middle, we see, I put I with faculty and TAs. These are the things that we as individuals can do within our realm of control. And for the equity abilities, this is our ability to recognize inequities. This is how we are able to respond to inequities at the individual level. And then we get to the blue sphere, where it's now focusing on we. As I mentioned earlier, equity requires collective efforts and collective action. And so these are the things that we can influence, but they aren't directly within our control. These are our departmental or institutional activities. These are classroom activities, all things that we can influence. And then the 4th area are the things that we should be concerned about. And it's beyond our individual and departmental scope, but it directly impacts the things that we do. So in this sort of domain of concern and influence, we can think about redressing, cultivating, and sustaining equity. Next slide. All right, so we're gonna pause here and actually do a poll. What we would like to do is have you, Kimberly's gonna put up the poll. We'd like you to select all of the equity abilities that you're currently using or developing. And we'll give you a few minutes for this. All right, so lots of people recognizing so far. And we have some sustainers too. That'll be great to learn about practices for doing that. Okay, we'll do about 30 more seconds. It looks like a few more people are thinking. All right, I think we've got most folks. All right, are you able to see the poll results? Perfect. So it looks like we have a lot of people who know, who are able to recognize inequities, and some folks who are cultivating and responding to inequities. And it looks like we'll think about some ways that we could strengthen our efforts around redressing and sustaining. All right, so I'm going to pass it back to Kimberly to start talking about how to apply this in biology.
Thank you. Okay, so switching gears a bit, now we're going to discuss how we can work together, faculty, staff, TAs, postdocs, everyone, to apply these skills. This is not only within our classrooms, but again, how we can work together to create change beyond our classroom, as well in our inclusive learning environments that we have that more direct individual control over. So as I go through the next few slides, as we saw from the poll, lots of folks are utilizing one or all of these abilities already. So if you have additional tips and strategies, ways you've been using them, or ideas spark as we're talking, please type in the chat or raise your hand and let us know your thoughts as well. So I'm going to go through these briefly. The overall goal is to provide a starting point and some additional resources, and you'll be able to further this discussion and how you'll apply these skills in the breakout activity after these few slides. So the full ability is listed here at the top. All these next few will look the same. We've collected one or two, 2 to 3 specific strategies that we think align with this skill and provided further resources. So skill number 1, the ability to recognize even the subtlest biases, inequities, and oppressive ideologies. And as FW mentioned, in order to recognize these, we need to know what they are, right? So this is a bit of pre-work, so to speak, that you may do before you enter a classroom or try to start the work for larger change. So to learn, you should be learning about existing inequities and challenging yourself to engage in critical self-reflection. Linked here is a list at this link here, and everything is also on the bottom where we got this from. It's a list of 24 inequities in US education experienced by students of color or those from under-resourced backgrounds in the US. And this goes from K through 12 through higher education. And just some quick examples, in higher ed, the studies showed that faculty responded more readily to white males requesting help in mentorship rather than women or students of color. Students felt that they were excluded from the larger student population. They couldn't as easily share or get information from their peers, and that their views were not represented because most views put forward in their courses are coming from a very Western civilization-based context. And then another resource, I also have an article linked here, Learning to See Inequity in Science by Kimberly Tanner, which is a great resource for starting to do this work and reflect. Additionally, the Racial Healing Handbook is a great resource. It has practical activities for navigating racism, challenging privilege, developing racial consciousness, and a culture of healing. We can also intentionally prepare for the diversity that we know will be in our classrooms. Learning or having access to students' names and the right way to pronounce them, what their preferred names are, perhaps finding out something about the students before they come into your classroom with surveys. And these strategies that are listed here are taken from the Structure Matters 21 Teaching Strategies paper from Kimberly Tanner as well. I just listed a couple where they're applicable. Integrating culturally diverse and relevant examples into your course content, and teaching from the moment students arrive, which really means building the classroom environment you want right from the moment students step foot in there, having your expectations clear, building the kind of learning community that you envision for equity. And if anyone has any questions, of course, please let me know as well. And again, if you're utilizing these strategies and abilities already, and you have further ideas, you can pop them in the chat and we'll share that out. So going to ability 2 is responding to biases, inequities, and oppressive ideologies in the immediate term. So the first strategy I have listed here is sort of maybe an in-between step to this, is establishing those classroom community norms, right? That's a way you can start teaching from the moment students arrive, is making, building that learning environment to be inclusive, to be respectful, to give students permission to respond when they may see microaggressions occurring, and make it known that you explicitly promote access and equity for all students. Another thing we can do together is develop upstander skills. So there's a link here for, there's practical, like almost fill in the blank type statements that you can either use yourself or provide for teaching assistant development if there is a microaggression or other sorts of inequities that occur in the moment. There's really practical and specific tips for responding to them. And then you can seek out trainings such as Green Dot bystander intervention trainings if offered at your institutions. These are just all some ways to start building up your upstander skills, because those are, it's, you know, hard work to do. It's not immediate to learn. And again, just coming back to this idea that this is a continual practice and learning together type of situation. But as long as we're engaging in this work, it should make it a little easier for us to respond to things when they happen in the moment. Okay, right, and then in the chat, FW reiterated that activities for recognizing and responding can be built into TA training programs as well, very explicitly and intentionally. The third ability is to redress biases, inequities, and oppressive ideologies in the long term by addressing their root causes. Oh, I actually meant to ask on the second one. I think this is a good place to, back to this teaching the students the moment they arrive and establishing these community norms, right? I didn't really list anything specific, but if anybody has a specific suggestion, please put it in the chat. So one thing might be, you know, encouraging your TAs to have inclusive office hours where there's multiple ways for students to engage with them, either in person or online, or you know, text chatting if they're not comfortable asking questions other ways. Okay. So back to ability number 3 is to redress. So some of our suggestions here, and again, this is, as FW mentioned, the skill where the action shifts from what you can do individually to beginning that working together for collective action. Designing and updating courses to be inclusive could be something that happens at a more departmental level, right? Can we influence curriculum changes? Have you done something in your course, or have you worked with TAs, or have you as a graduate student come up with an inclusive activity, or can serve as an ambassador for these types of larger departmental changes? Are there committees or communities you can form to bring about these sort of higher level changes beyond your classroom? And linked here is an article from EDUCAUSE about inclusive teaching and course design. That's where this figure is from, which I'm not going to go through it, but just the point being is that this is a nice summary of many specific pieces you can put in to design courses to be inclusive. And then going back to barriers to accessing strategies for student success, we should be thinking about how to intentionally create opportunities for marginalized students. And this article linked here is from CBE Life Science Education, Improving Underrepresented Minority Student Persistence in STEM. These are 5 recommendations to increase the URM persistence in their STEM majors from the Joint Working Group on Improving URM Persistence in STEM. And, you know, for example, if we notice that there are barriers for students of color to access individual research opportunities, or you're hearing that they have trouble finding those, how can we work together to provide better access for those opportunities? Okay, oops, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess I'm clicking on that resource. It's not what I wanted. Sorry about that. Okay, and then 4 and 5, we've kind of combined on one slide because again, these are really those working together for sustainable change abilities. So the ability to actively cultivate equitable anti-oppressive ideologies and institutional cultures, and the ability to sustain bias-free, equitable, and anti-oppressive classrooms, schools, ideologies, and institutional cultures. So you'll have more opportunity to think about this as the follow-up to our breakout activity, but the bottom line is to work together to be an advocate for change. And this article is from the Journal of Undergraduate Neuroscience Education, and it discusses strategic planning for real progress to happen at the institutional level with initiatives related to diversity and inclusion. And I just linked 2 other resources here. The Sea Change initiative stands for STEM Equity Achievement from AAAS. It's a proven self-assessment process to affect sustainable change with regard to DEI at US STEM institutions. And some of you might be familiar with the National Institutes on Scientific Teaching. One piece is inclusive teaching, and something that's done in these intensive institutes at the end is to sort of brainstorm how we can go back and be ambassadors for, you know, infusing more of this equity and inclusive practices into our departments. Okay, so now that we've covered some of those basic and specific strategies, again, if you have anything else to add, please share in the chat. I just wanted to bring it back to the circle of control. You know, whether you are as a faculty member, right off the bat, you might have certain more level of control over your course. If you're a graduate student as a TA, you know, there are certainly certainly work you can undertake, especially in regards to recognize and respond. But as we go up the levels for those abilities numbers 3, 4, and 5, that's more of the collective work that's outside of our individual sphere of control. But we're all concerned about the inequities and want to keep working together and learning together to help our students succeed. And again, infuse these resources and help TAs do this alongside us. FW, do you want to explain our breakout activity?
Yes. And so really to further re-emphasize what Kimberly has already mentioned, it's really important to talk explicitly with TAs, instructors of any kind, who to help them come to terms with what's within their sphere of control, what's within their sphere of influence, and what they should be concerned about. And I think some of that can do some work around managing expectations around the kinds of changes that we can make from where we are, and also perhaps temper some things that are unrealistic. So now we're going to actually jump into some scenarios to start thinking about how you might apply your equity abilities in different scenarios. So we have one scenario that's about a classroom interaction. One scenario has to do with mentoring. And then the third scenario has to do with departmental dynamics. So what we would like you to do is, and Kimberly's going to open the breakout rooms. It looks like, well, we have a lot of breakout rooms. But what we'd like you to do is to get into groups of 3 to 5 people to talk about one of the different scenarios. And we have in the Jamboard different sheets that are dedicated to each of the scenarios. So once you're in your group, just go to the Jamboard scenario and then add one sticky note about how you would respond to that situation.
Yeah, so there are many breakout rooms here. They are named by the scenario, so you can choose what topic you might be most interested in or able to contribute to the discussion. Take a few minutes to discuss with each other first. This item number 1 on the Jamboard slide, you know, how would you advise your TAs to respond to the situation, or how would you as a TA or faculty member respond? What equity abilities would you use, and then what can you do individually and collectively? And each group should post one post-it note on the slide that belongs to their breakout room with a specific piece of advice or solution. That's your output for the breakout discussion. Can you see the breakout rooms? Can anyone see them? And you have the ability to join which one you want, right? So if you want to start shuffling in there, try to, you know, we can help reshuffle if needed, but I think you should be able to pop in and out, try to get the room full, you know, 3 to 5 per group before going on to the next one. And we'll give you about 15 minutes to talk with each other. And again, discuss for a few minutes first, get your thoughts together, and then summarize with one strategy on a post-it note. So feel free to choose your breakout rooms, and we'll leave them open for about 15 minutes.
If anyone is unable to select and do a breakout room, let me know.
Yeah, we can help. Erin, do you want to pause the recording? All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some great discussion. And now we're going to go over the Jamboards. FW, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sorry, I was coughing on some water. All right, so Erin had sent a broadcast asking people to be prepared to share one sticky note from their group. And so we will start with the classroom groups. I think there are 4 different classroom groups. So if one person from the group could raise their hand and share their suggestion, that would be great.
Michelle?
So yes, we had this classroom scenario, and my group, and even this is a an older method, but definitely works. We talked about having name tents until you're really comfortable with your students' names, having name tents up, and also having them add their gender pronouns to that as well. So having that information there. One other suggestion was at the beginning of the semester, when you're getting to know your students, have them use their name when they're answering questions, or if they have to, anytime they have to speak, make sure they're saying their name so you can hear it over and over. And we thought, just because we know the importance of names, that it would be helpful if the teacher, the instructor, followed up with that student individually. Definitely not, we didn't think it was something that you should do in front of the whole class, but just to let them know, to make sure they're okay, because that can be that could be really hurtful to someone. So just making sure they're okay. And again, just, apologizing, but not, definitely not ignoring it, as if it didn't happen, and kind of, laughing it off and moving on from there. So those were our suggestions.
Absolutely, that was great. We were talking about in our small group, the importance of, or how useful name tents are. I see Emma's hand.
We talked a bit about having TAs use, teaching TAs strategies to help learn names and emphasizing the importance of actually learning and using names and recognizing that mistakes will happen at some time, and that's not a reason to not use names as well. So just kind of making explicitly clear some strategies that could be used to help with names.
Yes, I love that you said teaching them strategies for how to practice and learn names. There's doing it, but then there's also preparing the TAs to actually do it. That's great. Let's see, I don't see any others. Are there other suggestions from the classroom group? I think we can go on to mentoring. Oh, I see
Brian has.
Brian has.
Oh yeah, I was in Emma's group, but just since we were asking for more, I was saying like another strategy is having a seating chart, kind of knowing who is where, day one. But then one thing we talked about that I really liked was the idea of kind of staying humble a little bit, knowing that remembering names is hard, knowing that no matter how long you've known someone, sometimes you fumble on a name, and just kind of owning that that's like a human experience, and it's okay to be human in front of your students as long as you're being honest about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think humility can go a long way. And then also, I think folks often are afraid about making mistakes. So normalizing that mistakes do happen, I think, can also be helpful. Let's go into the mentoring scenario. Okay, so we have someone you're in a lab section, you're a TA for a lab section, and you overhear students talking about sexual misconduct and misgendering in a specific professor's lab, but you haven't seen it yourself. So I guess there are two mentoring groups. Are there folks from the mentoring group that can share?
I'm happy to talk about what we discussed in our group. Well, first of all, the scenario was not crystal clear to us. We weren't clear about whether the sexual misconduct or the misgendering was taking place in the lab that the TA was in itself, or whether it was taking place in someone else's lab. So one of the suggestions was for the TA to find out more information. We discussed whether they should talk to the students individually or in group. We didn't come up with a very good solution to that. Of course, the TA can always talk to their instructor. Of course, here comes into play whether the professor is the one at fault or not. So that would be a completely different situation. And then for every level in the hierarchy, you can always talk to somebody higher up in the hierarchy, which if you're stuck on what to do, there's always someone that will listen and advise you. And of course, the TA should point out resources on campus, safe resources that they can use, like the Title IX office.
I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you for mentioning TAs talk to your instructor, right? Because that's, TAs shouldn't be responsible solely on their own for managing these types of situations either, right? We can provide training resources to help them deal with the situations as they can in the moment, but always encourage them to come back and talk to you or their instructor if you are a TA. Thank you.
So I see some comments in the chat too about differences in terms of whether TAs are mandatory reporters. It looks like at Emma's institution they are, but at Denise's institution they are not. So I think this is really important to think about highlighting as part of the TA training, their role in dealing with these sorts of situations, especially since the practice will vary across institution. Are there folks who want to share more about the mandatory reporting processes? Catherine.
Yeah, we have mandatory reporting at our institution, and so it is part of our TA training. And the office is really helpful too about if you're not sure whether this is something to report or not, you contact them and they will talk you through it. And so we are encouraged to let students know up front that if anything happens, that we are mandatory reporters, but that doesn't mean that the police are going to descend on them or something like that, right? And so it's but that there are resources to help, right? And that's the role of the mandatory reporting, is to put people in touch with resources that may benefit them. So I think it works. I don't have enough direct experience myself, but it's helpful, I think.
Yeah, that's great and helpful insight. I think my takeaway from that comment too is whether or not they are mandatory reporters, perhaps going to the different offices at the institution to sort of find out ideas. And perhaps maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about the professor if their professor is someone doing this, but I think creating this culture where people are at least finding out what to do about something can be really helpful for equity. Let's go to the department situation. And let's see, we had one department group. So are there folks still from that group here?
Two of us, right? Catherine, do you want to divide and conquer here? One of the things I was reading this sort of as there is diversity on the campus in the biological sciences, but not in the research groups. And so we were thinking about how to recruit these students a little better. And some of those recruiting examples were to actually reach out to collaborate with other equity programs and centers or affinity groups on the campus or within the college or even within the department, making sure that those students are aware. We're doing something at our institution where we're helping students in introductory biology courses actually understand what research, undergraduate research is all about. And so we're trying to develop research cultural capital within our introductory level biology students, and this is being led by undergraduate students who are also represent the diversity of our student body, so that white faculty aren't coming in and talking to them about research experiences and how they can get involved. And we're teaching them how to reach out to faculty to do this, to try to make the experience a little less intimidating, teach them the norms. Also, I think it's imperative that we pay our students if we want our students from marginalized communities to participate. And that's not always something that TA has the ability to do, but they can talk to faculty, find out where are the paid experience, how can they find out about the paid research experiences. And then Catherine, do you want to finish up?
Yeah, I think you covered it well. The paying part, like I'm really thankful that our college has now started a fund essentially to pay for student research experience, and it's at $15 an hour, which that's not bad as things go these days, and it's certainly more money per hour than had been paid previously by a number of people. So and they're trying to encourage matching, where the college might pay for 20 hours a week over a period in the summer, and the faculty member pays the other 20 hours a week if it's going to be a full-time opportunity. So, but even just as Kelly was talking about, with the people who are involved in educating others about the options out there and how to get access to them, paying those people too is important.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that's coming up for me too is that, well, I'm thinking about the equity abilities and how across the 3 scenarios, they've been applied in different ways. But it sounds like folks are already doing a whole lot. And how do we then support TAs to think about these different levels of skills and where they can fit in within the broader work that we need to do for equity? So we'll go back to our slides. And now that we really wanted to do some crowdsourcing and thinking through those scenarios, we want you to just take about 90 seconds to type what your vision for equity is in biology. And if you can, link it to some of the equity abilities that we've discussed. And again, as you're thinking, or as you're getting ready to type, think about the work to recognize inequities, respond to them, cultivate, redress them, create new cultures around equity within our departments. It doesn't have to be an elaborate vision. It could be 1 to 2 sentences. We'd like you to drop it in the chat.
Also, if you're part of a group that has recently undergone transformation, right, because you already started this work, you can also tell us what that might have looked like. So I'm just going to read what's popping up so far. We can read together. It's helpful to think about the need to emphasize some things like names, Title IX reporting, and TA training, and probably repeatedly in TA training. Yes, I completely agree with that, right? Reinforcement, I think, particularly in the TA training context is really helpful. I mean, we know that helps all learners, right, to have deliberate repetition that's not overkill. Help new grad instructors see the importance of recognizing and responding to biases and inequities and help them feel empowered to work on redressing them, right? Yes, exactly. And, you know, that's, I think, to a good opportunity to work together, right? You know, we're learning, you're learning, the students are learning, and I think that creates sort of that community feeling too, right at the beginning, and helps give TAs the permission to, like you said, feel empowered to take those steps in front of their students. I would love to have a more diverse teaching team and see the department support those graduate in a way that makes it possible for them to work with us, right? Maybe paid undergrad credit also, yes, for sure. I would love to be able to do that for our TAs as well, to engage in professional development, 400 or so a semester. It's challenging. And if anyone else has any ideas about those kinds of things, please let me know. I would love to learn about it. FW, do you want to read the next few? And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I'm starting from the bottom, taking the time to learn the concepts to help us convey these ideas to our peers for a better and more inclusive environment. I'm creating a culture in which faculty and graduate students invite each other to DEI workshops such as this, and establishing individual and departmental growth mindset to DEI efforts. I love that, Brent, there is a recent study about developing growth. I can't remember if it was growth mindset classrooms rather than focusing on individuals. Kelly, I love this point. I want equity work to be expected, required, incentivized, rewarded, and valued by everyone in the campus community. Absolutely, I think that will go a long way. So I'll just go over our main points, the things that we really wanted to highlight here and thinking about as you're structuring your TA teaching development efforts. We really think that the equity literacy framework can make very clear the kinds of skills and the knowledge that TAs would need to be able to implement inclusive teaching. So our main points are really centering and targeting those structural inequities as we're having these conversations around DEI efforts. Focusing on expanding that sphere of influence. There are things within our control and influence, and how do we strengthen our skills in that realm? And then we also want to support TAs to learn explicitly about equity literacy. Oftentimes, when I go do trainings and things like that, TAs are like, well, we care about equity, we care about justice, but we don't know what to do. And we really want to stress the point that equity is a verb. It's a set of skills and knowledge that everyone can do and use to make our world and the places that we live and work more humane. And finally, this point around equity being ongoing individual and collective learning and action. So it's not something that we can pick up and put down whenever we feel like it. It's something we all have to keep working at and striving toward together.
Sorry, my computer is giving up on life right now. Hopefully I could switch my slide here. Okay, there we go. Last one. So yeah, we just have our contact information here. Thank you everyone for being here. We'll share out the chat, the Jamboards and slides and a follow-up as well. In addition to a link to this exit survey. It's like 4 questions, super quick. Please give feedback and thoughts are appreciated, as well as your participation today. And I hope you found this valuable.
I posted the link to the exit survey also. Thank you all so
Great,
much.
thanks, Erin. And then we have just our reference list here. All right. That's all we got.
Yeah, we're happy to answer any lingering questions that folks have, but thank you so much for coming.
Hi, Emma. Hi, Michelle. Hi, Catherine. Good to see you.
Can I go ahead and interject a question? This is something I've always wanted to ask at even just teaching and learning workshops, DEI workshops, et cetera, et cetera. My personal experience is that there's not a lot of males that attend these things in general, right? Like,
I agree.
I mean, that's even just how can I improve my teaching workshops? It doesn't even matter if it's a DEI effort or not, but I find that to also be true of DEI efforts as well, in workshops and whatnot, at least. And that's why I put, be better at least inviting others, because if I'm just staying here being quiet, that's not going to help the situation. So I'm trying to be reflective upon my own behavior, but I'm just curious if there's more that can be done in that area, or just, I don't know, just want to open up and be, at least put it out there and come to my own awareness and, I don't know, try to brainstorm solutions, I guess.
I love that you asked that question. It's a real problem. And I'm going to drop in the chat. There's an effort at Indiana University, Williamson. We have a Center for Excellence for Women in Technology. And there's an initiative that's around faculty male advocates and I can't remember, allies for equity. So really what they're trying to do is bring together a critical mass of men to support them in developing their equity skills for being good advocates for women and all students more broadly in their particular areas, because we know that that's like there's some gatekeeping mechanisms there. Straight white men often have greater access to different resources. And we know that we won't necessarily have, we won't be able to achieve 100% racial concordance for mentoring. And I don't think that's the goal. I think we should all be striving to be allies for each other within our varying positionalities. And one way to do that is supporting men to become better allies. But I think it's much better done when it's a critical mass than just like one person trying to achieve that. And it's been pretty successful. Like the faculty are usually like upper mid-level faculty who've had success with grants and different things. and they share their resources and networks and support with students and also faculty.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. I'll have to dig into that website some more.
Yeah. And see if you can find colleagues that are sort of on the same wavelength as you. Like they might keep it a little quiet, but they might be there. And if you can connect with each other, that would be great. I bet.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. There certainly are, but there's also tend to be more white males who are like, wait, we're putting DEI efforts in our RPT documents. Like, whoa, like, you know, I mean, that's, and we've made progress by all means, but you know, part of me is like, yeah, it would be great to have those people saying no in a workshop where we can actually talk about these things and learn some more things. But yeah.
I mean, we always tell people for workshop recruitment, like invite all your friends, right? So like, you know, think if you know a bunch of men that are interested in such a thing, right? And maybe you're all hanging out in different departments and don't get to go to the same kinds of events, you could consider forming like a learning group or something and brainstorm together how to establish these changes at your institution a little bit more deliberately, or even just literally invite them to things if you know they might be interested. Because I feel like if, you know, I'm really glad you asked that question too, because I almost said that when FW, Aaron and I were hanging out when you were in breakout rooms, because I was just scrolling through the participant list and I'm like, this is almost all women in here, which we see in faculty development and engagement in TA training efforts as well. So for sure it's happening. Now I forgot my point in the middle of talking, but yeah, just more of that, you know, you could start with more of those grassroots efforts, kind of a way to achieve that. Oh, that was my point, because then you become almost a marginalized community in that context, right? So even if you do have the passion and desire to attend these things, you're going to think, well, there's not going to be any other males there that you know, whatever. Now I'm marginalizing myself. So by doing the grassroots stuff and inviting people, you know, that could sort of overcome that barrier a little bit potentially.
Adam may have something to add too. I know you've done a lot of trailblazing.
I don't know about trailblazing. I think that there's just a diversity of people's sort of where they're at with respect to this field. Like you said, like all the way across I'm trying my best to be an advocate and show up to these kinds of things, and to the other side of the spectrum of people actively pushing back. I think the most in academia anyways, in terms of men and as it pertains to race, you know, whiteness, a lot of people are sort of neutral, right? In that they can agree on the goals and the vision, but there is a lot of, I think, fear at the heart of actually taking that next step and showing up at things and doing proactive strategies to like be working towards these goals, because I think the cost of remaining quiet is very, very small. And the risk of opening your mouth and saying something wrong is very high and perceived to be very high. And so I really am sympathetic to this, like everything you all are saying, of just let this sort of inertia, if you can get the momentum going, that it gets its own momentum and inertia in that positive sense. And so I think about things that we're doing here at Oregon State. We have like what's called the Social Justice Education Initiative. We have a whole position of this woman at our university who's just amazing, Jane Waite, and she leads these pretty extensive sessions on a variety of DEI topics. And it's not mandatory, but what it is promoted by the university as a great idea that everybody should do. And as it's been around longer and longer, the number of people who haven't done that has gone way, way down, because it's just gained steam. And so, and you kind of become the one person who hasn't done that, right? And this thing that everybody's talking about. So I think that, like, you don't want to necessarily be like, we're mandating that all white men go to the DEI sessions, right? Because you know what that's going to do. It's just going to cause them to shut down even more. But what you can do is just work with the levers at your disposal to like get some momentum going. And then hopefully the vision is that it just becomes stranger and stranger to be the one person who hasn't participated in these kinds of things. But it's hard, right? The like inertia in the other sense of just like staying safe in your tiny little bubble is really incentivized, I think, for a lot of white men.
We've been having conversations at our department meetings with everybody who shows up, and it's on Zoom these days. So we go into breakout rooms, and there'll be a topic each month, and we're trying to educate ourselves and think about things a bit, and like meritocracy, right? We all sort of think that, yeah, the people who, should get the things are the ones who have the most qualified, but what are the qualifications based on, right? And how accessible are they to everyone? And but we just do it in small bites regularly. And so it makes it okay to talk about stuff a little more, I think, too, which is helpful.
I love that, Catherine, because I do think, I don't know if you all are familiar with Julie. Now I'm gonna forget her last name. She wrote a book called Equity in Science. Julie, she's at USC. Anyway, she's talked about the small wins theory of change, where it's not like there are these small things that we're doing that can create large scale change. So as an example, when I teach residents how to teach in the clinical learning environment, and one of the things that we're just now rolling out is these, what I call health equity talk conversations. And it's really just a 5-minute conversation about health equity, incorporating that into their clinical teaching medical students. And it just amps up the conversation around health equity. It makes it something that everybody's talking about, thinking about. And it's not overwhelming. People don't get overwhelmed by having a 5-minute conversation. So it could be something like in a lab meeting, we're going to have a 5-minute conversation around some equity related insight or article or something like that as part of the lab meeting. It might not be the entire focus, but as people are talking about it in these little small micro bites, they might get more comfortable